Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Volunteer Florida's AmeriCorps Budget 101 webinar. Today, we are excited that you are interested in applying for AmeriCorps and delighted to help support your application throughout this period. I serve as the National Service Programs Director, and joining me to lead the call is Richard Swartz, our CFO, and our financial analyst staff. A couple of quick updates for you that are engaged in the application process. We wanted to make sure that you were aware that the technical assistance calls from earlier in March have been recorded and posted on our website, as well as the written FAQs. So those are some additional resources for you. There was an AmeriCorps 101 webinar that's also posted from earlier in February. And today's Budget 101 seminar or webinar is our final kind of resource to provide applicants from Volunteer Florida as you move through. But we are always available to answer your questions via phone or the email that's associated with that, with the no-fill AmeriCorps RFP at volunteerflorida.org. So welcome, and with that, I'd like to introduce Richard Swartz, our Chief Financial Officer, to lead us through the webinar. Richard.
Thank you, Kat. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Budget 101 webinar. I'll be going through some slides on this presentation, as well as we do have a sample budget that is also on our website, but it's also part of this presentation where I'll be highlighting hopefully some important factors that you'll understand better when this is all completed. With me is one of my financial analysts, Jennifer Young, who will be here to assist me with possibly any questions that you may have at the end. So let's get started. We're about to go in presentation mode, so everyone will be muted for right now.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
Okay, so the functions of a CNCS program budget, it becomes part of the grantee's contractual obligations. It also serves as a blueprint for the activities supported under the grant, helps ensure conformance to provisions and regulatory restrictions, used to monitor and measure progress towards meeting matching requirements. And matching is very important, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and also used to monitor and compare budgeted to actual expenses. Now, a budget is nothing more than an estimate. It's an estimate of, once you're given the award and granted the award, how do you think you're going to spend this money? And budgets are estimates, and they're based on what you believe to be the best to your ability at the time that you prepare your budget. And please be aware that your budgets may also be revised. An effective budget, number one, it's got to be realistic. It reflects expected program revenues and expenses and its capacity to carry out program activities. It needs to be consistent, aligned with your program's goals and objectives. And it should be flexible. A project's financial and operating circumstance can change quite often, and you must have a budget that can adapt to changing circumstances. And just to reiterate, a budget should be prepared to the best of your ability based on the stated facts that you know of at the time that you are preparing your budget. We refer to a budget, the form itself that you'll be filling out your budget. It's a budget narrative. So when you think of the term narrative, you think of words and terms. The budget narrative itself is really a spreadsheet or a document that has all of your costs that you're expecting to spend on this spreadsheet. Review your program's goals and objectives. Estimate the resources that you need in order to achieve the program goal. For example, number of participants, such as members or volunteers, staff positions if applicable, space, utilities, supplies, telephone, health insurance and liability insurance. If you're going to have uniforms, training, child care, or transportation. As part of the preparation, follow instructions in your NOFO or NOFA or other guidance received from CNCS or us here at Volunteer Florida. Organize your narrative to fit budget categories on your budget form or proposal. Now, let me just expound upon that for a second. It's very helpful for you if your accounting software, your chart of accounts, if your chart of accounts is consistent to the format of the budget narrative. And as we'll see when we go through the spreadsheet, the various sections of the budget narrative, it's very helpful for you if your accounting software is structured that it's consistent with the form of the budget narrative. It'll be that much easier for you when you compare actuals versus budgets. Provide adequate descriptions and calculations to support amounts, and we'll look at some of that. You need to be as detailed and as clear as possible so that when clarification of budgets is requested, the clarifications, A, would be minimal, if not at all, and also, B, it will allow you the opportunity to explain in as much detail what it is that you're trying to achieve on your budget. Allocate costs based on a consistent and documented cost allocation plan. And examples of cost allocation plans include a level of effort, for example, percentage of time spent on an activity times the salary for that particular activity. For rent, total program space divided by the total of the host agency space. Other expenses, percentage of expenses for program versus total organization's expenses. So these are various cost allocation methods that are allowable. The budget structure, the next couple of slides is going to go into what the actual structure of the narrative is. And you'll see in a couple of slides our budget narrative. Just so you're aware, there is a sample budget narrative on our website that is exactly the same that you will find in this budget webinar. So the first section is section 1, which are your program's operating costs. And they include personnel expenses, personnel fringe benefits, staff travel, member travel, equipment, supplies, contractual and consultant services, staff training, member training, evaluation, and other program operating costs. And again, just to reiterate, it's very good if your accounting chart, your accounting software's chart of accounts is consistent to align in with these various costs. The next section, section 2, member costs, such as your living allowance or stipend, member support costs, such as Social Security, workers' compensation, health care, unemployment insurance, and other member support costs if applicable. Section 3 are administrative and indirect costs. There's 2 methods to recover administrative costs. For AmeriCorps only, there is the fixed 5% method, and that will be 5% of the total of CNCS funds expended. No documentation supporting the allocation is required. The calculation is not just a straight 5%. CNCS has a specific formula to calculate the fixed method, and that is taking the total of your sections 1 and 2 times 0.0526 times 0.6. So if you were to calculate your total of your sections and take it times 5% and compare that to this particular formula, you'll notice there is not a material difference, but yet there's a difference, and this is what CNCS requires as far as your calculation is concerned. For the corporation fixed grantee, totals of both Section 1 and Section 2 of CNCS and the grantee share times 10%. The second method is a federally approved indirect cost rate method, which requires an approved rate from the federal government. Approved rate constitutes documentations of costs, including any amount payable by CNCS. Let's talk about the next section, staff and member travel. An agency travel reimbursement request or form must be provided for reimbursement, signed and dated by the traveler and their supervisor. The traveler must indicate the purpose of travel, dates and times of arrival, and departure of travel, and destination. One of the reasons I wanted to have this as a separate slide was so that you have an example of how detailed these particular costs have to be in your budget narrative. And we'll see an example of this shortly. Maximum mileage reimbursement rate is 44.5 cents per mile. Meals cannot exceed the state of Florida per diem rates, which is $6 for breakfast, $11 for lunch, $19 for dinner. Overnight travel is required to claim meals. So, for example, if one of our staff went from Tallahassee to Jacksonville and came back the same day, they would not be allowed to claim meals for that day. If the meal is provided at the training, the individual traveling may not claim that meal for reimbursement. Let's talk about quickly food guidelines. Food and beverage may only be charged to AmeriCorps grant when used for training, and the meeting or training must meet all the following criteria. Must be a minimum of 6 hours in order to request reimbursement for any meal. Must be a dissemination of knowledge, and an agenda is required as far as documentation purposes is concerned. Must be considered reasonable and necessary. Must be a necessity to keep attendees in the training for the length of time and not merely just to provide food. And snacks are not an allowable cost. This next page is a sample of the budget narrative. And you'll see the first column shows the various types of costs, such as Section 1 program operating costs. And this here is just a sample, and this is exactly consistent with the sample that we have provided separately on our website. Now, two of the columns are very critical columns for you to understand, and that is the column that says CNCS share and grantee share. CNCS share, that column is for the costs that you are putting down that represent the amounts that you are going to be requesting for your reimbursement for your award. The grantee share is the match. That's the required match that you must provide. The total cost of the program is the sum of the CNCS share and the grantee share combined. So in this particular example, if we just look at the first line item for the program director for personnel expenses, where we have that the grantee share is $45,000, it's in the grantee share column, that's going to be, for purposes of this illustration, your match. So So you're not requesting you're not requesting as part of your budget as far as what you're going to request reimbursement for a program director position, but you're putting that down as part of what you're putting in for your match. And the same thing in this example for the program assistant. And you'll notice that the personnel fringe benefits follow your salaries. The fringe benefits are also in the match column. And if you notice out to the far right for the budget narrative, you have to put a description as to what this represents. So, for example, FICA, Social Security, and Medicare, 7.65% of your total salaries. If you look at health insurance, $7,920 in this example, $330 per month times 12 months times 2 full-time equivalent. Other, which you must itemize, 3% of salaries, which includes workers' compensation, dental, and life insurance. And these examples that we're putting in the budget narrative, these are descriptions that you're going to be required to explain what these costs are for. And this next part is Section 2 for the member costs. And you'll see that there's a large dollar amount of $245,000 in this example, and that is under CNCS share, so that's going to be part of your award. And in this example, you're saying that $29,640 is going to be what is matched. If you take the 20 full-time members at $13.732 each, that's where you should get the calculation of $274,640, which is your total cost of the program, which is your award plus your match. But when you're doing these budgets, you need to take the grand total into consideration as part of your calculations. So again, if you look at the next line item, 1 year half-time, 900 hours, is $30,000, and that's all in the awarded column. In this example, there's no match being provided, and that would be 6 half-time members at $5,000 each. So, for example, if I had $15,000 under my match, and the total cost of my program was $30,000 of my award, plus $15,000 of my match, which would be a total of $45,000, my description would then say 9 half-time members at $5,000 each, because 9 times 5 is $45,000. So your description must fit the total cost of your program. If you look at the very bottom, your budget totals, you'll see that your award in this example is $342,738. Your match is $156,715. So your total cost of your program, which is your award plus your match, is $499,453. And just at the bottom, you also need to list your source of funds. So for your match, in this example, we've said that $90,908 is to assist with personnel salaries and benefits. $45,307 is in kind for program operating, and $20,500 is to assist with supplies, program operating costs, member support costs, etc. So that is your total anticipated revenue, which must equal the grand total of the grantee share, or again, the match in this example is $156,715. Let's talk about some examples of allowable costs. And this bulleted list is probably most of the examples of allowable costs. Office supplies, member service gear, travel reimbursement, of course, following our travel guidelines, background checks, rent, meeting space, rental fees, training fees, contracted training, important not to exceed $750 per day. So if you're hiring a trainer for a training, that cost cannot exceed $750 a day. Employee training, member living allowances, member support costs. The next slide shows some examples of unallowable costs: lobbying, fines and penalties, expenses not necessary to meet program objectives. So sorry, staff retreats and holiday parties are not allowable costs. Entertainment or alcoholic beverages are unallowable. Costs that would constitute waste, fraud, and abuse. Unreasonable costs from a prudent person perspective. And costs with no logical basis for allocating to your program. This next slide talks about AmeriCorps match requirements. And match requirements are based on percentages and in the time frame that your program has been in service. So the regulatory match, grantees must meet minimum requirements as shown in the table below, up to a 50% overall match. $1 for every CNCS dollar by year 10. So what that means, to say it a little bit differently, is that if you're in the 10th year of your program, your match has to be 100% of your award. And for specifics, you can see your NOFO and application instructions. So if you're a first-year program up through year 3, your match requirement is 24% as a minimum. Year 4 is 26%. Year 5 is 30. Year 6, 34. Year 7, 38. Year 42. Year 9, 46. Meeting match stated in the grant application is required. So, for example, the 24% match is the minimum, but the organization agrees to a 35% match. The organization is held to the 35% match requirement. And again, this is all done when you're doing your budget narrative. Failure to meet match requirements could result in a proportional reduction in CNCS award funds. Final invoice will not be paid until match requirements are met. If there are any questions regarding match requirements, feel free to contact your Volunteer Florida Program Manager and or the Volunteer Florida Finance staff if you feel you will not meet the match requirement. And one of the things that we do here at Volunteer Florida is the finance team meets with the program team probably about 6 months into the program year so that we can do a review of actual versus budget to see what percent of funds are left to spend. And if on a weighted average it is determined that your program does not appear to be meeting either the amount of the award or the match, we communicate that, the finance staff communicates that to the program managers, and the program managers will be back in touch with you, the program, and let you know where you stand and what can be done to help you with meeting your requirements.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
And that kind of summarizes our Budget 101 webinar. Would like to open up the floor to any questions, and if there's something that Jennifer and I are not able to answer, we will default to Kat, who probably knows everything about everything.
Richard, this is Steve Chapman.
Steve, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Hey, I may have missed something in the reading, but I didn't understand on the budget example for halftime why there was no grantee funds.
Would you repeat that question, please, Steve?
I noticed on your sample budget when you were going over living allowance for the halftime figures, all of the funds were on CNCS side. I didn't understand why there was no percentage of the $30,000 under grantee.
This is just an example
Okay.
of how, this is just one example of how a budget could work, and I think I did expound on that and say, well, if there was $15,000 in match, that the total cost would be $45,000, which would have equaled 9 halftime members.
Yep, I remember you saying that. I just wasn't, sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
Where's your name?
Oh, está.
Any other questions?
Que a la misma vez estoy escuchando mucho.
I didn't hear you when you said click button.
Well, if there's no further questions, which I don't believe there are, I hope that this budget webinar was informative for you. Please do not hesitate to contact me with any questions that you might have afterwards. Please feel free to reference this exact narrative, which is on our website. One of the things that I'd really like for you to take from this that's extremely important is to understand what the two columns mean. That the CNCS share column represents the amount of your award, and that the grantee share column represents your match. And when you are providing your calculations, if you're providing, for example, travel, X dollars in hotel for X number of staff for X number of nights, that you are preparing that calculation based on the total cost. So you could have just award dollar amounts under CNCS share. You could possibly just have match amounts under grantee share. But if you have both, which then would be the sum of those two to equal the total cost of your program, make sure that your calculations equal the total cost of your program. So thank you very much for calling in today and being part of this webinar. Again, if there's any questions, our phone number here is 850-414-7400, or please feel free to email your program manager. And thank you very much again for your time.